Hey guys, my name is Kai, and with both mages and Lagoons getting buffed this patch, I wanted to briefly talk about how to play Lagoons correctly. Specifically, I want to go over why the majority of players that I see, even in Masters and Grandmasters, are playing this comp wrong. But I'm going to be honest, I don't even blame them. Lagoons is arguably, in my opinion, one of the most complicated and most counterintuitive comps that we have in the current set. I'm hoping that by the end of this video, you'll understand why the thumbnail is really not a bait, and that you really should never be playing Seraphine if you decide to go vertical Lagoons. Okay, so why is Lagoon so difficult compared to other vertical comps? Well, for one, Lagoons has 4, technically 5 different variations of the vertical comp. Luckily, the variations are not that different from one another, but to play Lagoons efficiently, it's very helpful to know the different lines that this comp can go. For the sake of brevity, because I know this video might be a little long, I'm not going to go over the Seraphine reroll variant of Lagoons, but if you want, I will leave a little info card up here to Maskoff's video, because he did a great job explaining how the reroll Seraphine comp works, and if you're interested in how to play it, I highly suggest going into the info card and go watching his video. But back to what I was saying, the second reason why Lagoons is so difficult is because Lagoons requires a lot of conditions to go right in the early game. It's not a comp you can easily force or pivot into, and if you don't have a Lagoon start by like 2-3 at the latest, you really should consider going something else. The third reason is because unlike 6 Ragewing or 7 Jade, where the third tier of the vertical trait is arguably pretty strong, 9 Lagoons, the third tier of the Lagoon vertical, at least in the current patch, is just absolutely horrendous for what it provides, knowing that you have to play so many dogshit units on your board to keep 9 Lagoon teched in. In short, 6 Lagoon fucks, 9 Lagoon sucks. Something 69. Finally, like I said before, Lagoons is incredibly counterintuitive. Your endgame board will surprisingly not include a Seraphine. The Lagoon focus augments, and again, at least for the current patch, which these would be High Tide, Lagoon Crest, and Oasis, are almost all the time very awful to take unless very niche and very specific conditions are met, where taking these augments are actually okay. And not to mention how Nyla is actually going to be your secondary carry in most of these variations, and you're never going to have Sins activated within your traits. You guys finally understand why I'm saying Lagoons is the most complicated comp of the set? But don't worry, by the end of this video, you'll have it perfectly mastered. Alright, so first off, how strong even is Lagoons? Well, in my opinion, it's one of the strongest comps that you can play, but it's also one of the most inconsistent comps that you can play. When certain conditions fall into place, which again we will address later, it easily has one of the most capped endgame boards with either Nyla 3 and or Psalm 3 on your endgame board. Pause for a second, Editor Kai here. I just wanted to clarify that Nyla 3 and Psalm 3 are only possible because of Lagoon stacking. You farm a lot of gold from Lagoon stacks, and at 400 stacks you even get a champion duplicator. If you're playing Lagoons and you manage to hit 400 stacks, chances are you're already thinking about Nyla 3 and or Psalm 3 as your potential win conditions. I'll leave a link in the description below to the Lagoon table, so you can always take a look at it while you're playing Lagoons, and that way you know what you're going to hit at certain stacks. Anyways, back to the video. It's not that uncommon to hit those crazy units when certain conditions are met. But on the other hand, if you low roll while playing Lagoons or you're heavily contested, good luck going top 4. It's going to be very hard, and most of the time you'll have to end up pivoting into a different type of board instead. But believe it or not, Lagoons in the previous patch, before the mage buff and before the Lagoons buff, Lagoons was actually not a bad comp at all. People just didn't know how to play it yet. About 2 weeks ago, I VOD reviewed about 3 days worth of Dish Soap's VODs, who was just hard forcing Lagoons because he was just going through some sort of a phase. Dish Soap, for those of you who don't know, was rank 1 at the time and is currently rank 2 in North America. And again, I don't know what got into him, but he hard forced Lagoons trying to optimize it for like 3 days straight, and I just sat there watching him experiment and mold. But at the end of the day, he managed to optimize Lagoons, and this video in itself is both an amalgamation of what I've taken away VOD reviewing his gameplay and my own personal experience while playing this comp. Let's go and actually talk about the comp. God bless. Cool. Alright, so before we can talk about the early and mid game, you need to understand where we're actually headed, where our destination is, what our end game board looks like, before we can talk about how to navigate the early and mid game. So this is what our destination looks like. This is what I call the standard variation of the Lagoon end game board. And once you understand this one, the other variations are very easy to understand, but we need to talk about how this standard variation of Lagoon works. This is the board that you'll probably be playing the most often. Here you're playing Psalm 2 and Nyla 2, with Psalm absolutely needing blue buff and Morelos, and Nyla needing to be itemized as well. A naked Nyla will really do nothing, but an itemized Nyla 2 will do a lot of damage. Now you might notice Lagoons has a very weak frontline, where you're playing Malphite 2, Salas 2 on your endgame board. But in order to combat this lack of frontline, once you have the Morelos slammed onto Psalm, any other extra bells you should be thinking that's a ZZ Rod. The reason why it's almost vital to have at least one ZZ Rod in your comp is because, one, ZZ Rod is really good at stalling out time. By stalling out time, Zoe is able to cast Daisy, usually at least once, which is another extra frontline unit. But two, and the bigger reason, is because Nyla and Psalm are all about backline access. Nyla will always jump into the back and kill the carries, but Psalm will also help out and dish a lot of damage as well, because he doesn't give a crap about frontline. He's just hitting literally everything on the board. Make sure you're heavily prioritizing ZZ Rod once you have the Morelos slammed. Alright, now that we understand what our endgame looks like, let's talk about Lagoon openers. Like I said before, Lagoons has very strict constraints when it comes to playing a good game of Lagoon. Right when the game starts on the very first carousel, you're going to be looking for Lagoon units, but also Morello components and tiers. And then right after the first carousel, you're going to want to immediately scout and try to figure out whether or not it's a mage noms game. These two steps are pretty important, and I'll explain more on this later. Then after neutrals on 2-1, make sure you get a good look at your components and your units and figure out whether or not Lagoons is actually possible from this spot. There aren't a lot of possible openers, but Lagoon openers include usually one of the following. 3 Lagoons start by 2-2 or 2-3 at the latest. Anything later than that, you should probably reconsider and go something else. Along with a strong AP item that you know you'll be able to throw onto Psalm later, such as Rabadons or best case scenario, a Morellos. Another opening could be a strong AP unit along with a strong AP item, such as having JG plus Mages teched in at 2-1. You could have a 3 Lagoon start by 2-2 or 2-3 with the blue buff. That works as well. Another opener could be Lagoon Crest at 2-1 with a strong Lagoon Crest holder, which in my opinion is really only Ezreal in the early game. And even then, I feel like Ezreal 1 is pretty lackluster. I think you need Ezreal 2 plus a Lagoon Crest, and that's a very niche scenario. You'll only see that like 1 in like 100 games. The last obvious opener that I can think of is hitting High Tide at 2-1 as your augment, but you already have 3 Lagoons teched in. High Tide, and we'll talk about augments later, but High Tide in general is very, very bad to take, especially in the mid to late game. But if you have 3 Lagoons already teched in, and you scout the lobby and see not a lot of people are playing Lagoons, taking High Tide at 2-1 can actually be very, very good. But anyways, hooray! Let's say you were able to identify a Lagoon opener despite the tight constraints. What is the game plan? Well, let's talk about augments that you should be keeping an eye out for. Healing augments are S++ tier. Lagoons has no innate healing, and because Psalm needs to build a Morello and blue buff, the third item is usually an item such as JG or Rabadon, so you won't have any healing teched in. So second wind, Celestial Blessing, and Thrill are all great, but in terms of ranking them in order, second one's the best one, Thrill is the best one late game. So if you find Thrill in your late game and you still don't have a healing augment, you should probably take Thrill, and Celestial Blessing comes in last. Cybernetic Uplink, Luden's Echo, and Essence Theft are also great as well. Blue Battery 2 can be great as well, but only if you don't have blue buff already teched onto Psalm. Blue Battery and blue buff do not work in conjunction with one another, so if you already have blue buff, just skip Blue Battery 2. As for other augments such as Blue Battery 1, Axiom Mark, or Lagoon oriented augments, you really should never take those unless, again, like we specified at the very beginning, those niche scenarios happen to present themselves. Oh, and Mage Crest. Do not take it. It's not worth it to take it, only because it's not worth it to sacrifice a gold augment slot for Mage Crest. You are almost always presented with better options. Now that we know which augments to keep an eye out for, let's get back into the game plan. Unless you're sitting on a lot of 1-cost pairs, you should almost always level to 4 at 2-1 and play 2 Bruisers, ideally with 3 Lagoons. If you decide to stay level 3 at 2-1, regardless of whether or not you hit your pairs, you're going to want to level to 4. Teching in that extra frontline unit will keep you significantly healthier than if you were to stay level 3 again at 2-2. It is very, very greedy to stay level 3 at 2-2. Next, you will not be picking up Zac whatsoever unless it is your strongest board and it's the only way you can keep 3 Lagoons teched in. If you recall the endgame board that I showed you earlier, your frontline is going to consist of Malphite 2, Sylas 2. So ideally, you're going to want to tech in 2 Bruisers as soon as you can, assuming one of those Bruisers is in fact Malphite and the other one can be Skarner, Jax, or hopefully a Sylas. Finally, in the early game, you really need to prioritize blue buff and Morellos. You can skip the Morellos early game if it'll preserve you a decent amount of HP and you're able to slam an AP item that you know Psalm will be able to use later, such as JG or Rabadon. But if you have the components for it, especially a belt, you might be better off holding off for Carousel in hopes of hitting that Morellos. But if you have blue buff, just slam that shit onto Kai'Sa. Now, the early to mid game is all about HP preservation while trying your best to prioritize both a strong enough board that won't get 4-0'd every single round, plus the blue buff and Morellos. Kai'Sa will be your early AP item holder throughout the early and mid game because she is very good at item holding for Psalm. She uses blue buff very well, she uses Rabadons very well, she uses Morello very well. It is a perfect match. If you hit any strong AD items you know you're going to want for your Nyla later, and their components don't synergize well with Psalm, and they aren't ZZ Rock components, feel free to slam those onto whoever you want during the mid game that you know you will be selling later. Some common examples of this include BT or Deathblade. Bunch of swords, and it's a good way to kill Cloak. Basically, early to mid game is all about playing as flexible as possible, playing the strongest board you can with the constraints that you're given, while keeping 3 Lagoons and 2 Bruisers teched in until 3-5. Once it's 3-5, ideally you level to 7, and assuming you are managing your econ well, this should not be much of a problem. Depending on how strong your board is at 3-5, you can decide to either sit or roll. In general, you should roll here if your board is losing by a large margin or you know you're definitely getting contested for Psalms. Alternatively, you can sit at level 7 if you're healthy and your board is decently strong and you know you're not being contested. A strong board at this point usually looks like an upgraded front line with Kai'Sa 2 with both Morello and blue buff already slammed. But once you manage to hit a Psalm, feel free to take out Kai'Sa whenever you want and slam blue buff Morello onto Psalm instead. Usually at level 7, your board is going to look like a 6 Lagoon 3 mage board, and you'll probably be playing Seraphine and Zyra for 6 Lagoons and 2 Whisper. But once you hit level 8, you will be replacing both of those units for 5 mages instead with a Nyla. From there, it's pretty straightforward. You tech in Nyla as your 6th Lagoon unit, and once you have your Psalm items done, start prioritizing her items as well, and slam any ZZ routes that come your way onto your Sylas. Now, I did briefly say this before, but Nyla is a crazy strong unit once she's tier 2. Tier 1 is going to feel a little lackluster, even if you have her fully itemized. Just so you guys know what items to look for when you're playing Nyla, S tier usually includes Deathblade, Bloodthirster, GA, and IE. A tier usually includes GS, Hodge, and Titans, and B tier is usually like Gunblade, Last Whisper, but again, she's very flexible. If you hit a good 80 item, feel free to slam it onto her. Your third item on Psalm is usually going to look like Rabadon's or Jeweled Gauntlet. Quite honestly, if you get any other item into that third slot, it's not going to be great. The reason why is because Archangels and GS, you're going to feel it. It's going to feel lackluster, and there's no point in ramping up damage with an Archangels when the whole point of Lagoons, like I said before, is you got to kill their backline before they're able to kill your front. With Psalm having Morello and a really strong AP item like Rabadon's or JG, even if Psalm is unable to one-shot, let's say like a Xayah 2, Nyla is there to help just clean everything else. Those two working in conjunction with one another is what makes this comp so strong. That's why, by the way, if you run into a Lagoon player, Trap Claw is actually really nice to have. Now, anyways, as the game progresses and you start saving up money at level 8, make sure to pick up any Nylas and Psalms on your way to level 9. Your level 9 9th unit is almost always a Bard, but if you hit a lot of extra Nylas and a lot of extra Psalms on the way to 9, you can actually consider staying at level 8 and rolling down at level 8 to hit Nyla 3 or Psalm 3 instead. But most of the time, you'll end up just going 9 anyways, teching in Bard, and because Lagoon farms you so much money, you'll usually still be able to play Nyla 3 or Psalm 3, assuming you're still healthy at that point. Congrats though, you finally understand how to play Lagoons. Bravo, you understand the standard variation, great job. Now I know that there are 3 other variations, but now that you understand how the standard variation works, the other 3 are not only easy to understand, but very easy to remember. The reason why they're so easy to remember is because all these variations, including the standard one, revolve around 6 Lagoons, 5 mages, and none of them contain a Seraphine. Let's briefly go over each of the variations. Alright, so the first variation we can talk about is when you natural a mage emblem. Like I said before, you don't want to be taking a mage crest when it's offered as a gold augment, but sometimes you find random spats and you can make a mage emblem. Why not? If that's the case, slam it onto Zyra. Now you have 2 Whispers teched in and you still have 5 mages. Very simple. The next variation I want to talk about is Mage Nomsy. And this is, remember when I said earlier, you want to know whether or not it's a Mage Nomsy game? Well, the reason why is this. Mage Nomsy is actually really good in Lagoon comp. And what is also really great about this is that if you happen to roll a lot of extra AP items, feel free to slam them onto Nomsy. Also during mid game, let's say for example, you don't hit your Morello blue buff, but you hit like Shojin plus like something else. You can actually just tech into Mage Nomsy instead, and you can just play a vertical mage board instead, which will last you until about stage 5. And maybe with the gold you saved up, you can think about pivoting into like something like a 4 dragon board with Alshin or Asol to carry the Mage Nomsy item. It's just always a good pivot to have in case you need it. The last variation is if you hit that Lagoon Crest at 2-1 and you were playing like Ezreal 2 at the beginning. Well, you can feel free to slam Lagoon Crest onto Zoe and just tech out Talia and you play Lux Flat instead. But if it is a Mage Nomsy game, you can actually slam the Lagoon Crest onto Nomsy and play Zoe. And this is arguably one of the strongest level 8 boards that you can play with Lagoons teched in. Okay, but holy fuck. Thank you for making it to the end, and I swear to God, if I see you motherfuckers play Lagoons at level 8 and you have a Seraphine teched in, I will do unspeakable things to your mother. Consensually. Oh, and a quick mini announcement. Thanks to you guys, I'm now officially a YouTube partner. I would scream, but it's really late at night and I have been filming for like 4 hours in my roommate's home. I can't be too excited, but like, let's fucking go, dude. Like that, like we did that shit. Like that's pretty dope. I truly appreciate all the crazy amount of support this channel has garnered over the past like 2 weeks. I'm truly grateful for every single like, comment, and subscription. It just blows my fucking mind. And please follow me on Twitch over at twitch.tv/Watanabe_Kai if you just want to chill, hang out, or if you have any questions, please. I love answering questions. I will answer anything that you got from me. Please feel free to send it over. Take care, guys. And also, by the way, one last thing, sorry. If you have anything you want to see in particular, like a guide on a specific comp like Darkflight, Shimmer, or Whispers or whatever, or like just general stuff like how to pivot, how to position, how to transition your board, stuff like that, just please let me know. Like I want to make, you guys are so nice because you guys are like, oh, guides, but then I'm over here like, I don't know what guides to make. So, you know, help a brother out. Like if you have anything in particular you want to see, please just leave it in the comments. All right, I will let you guys go. Take care, guys, and I will see you guys all later. Have a good night. Bye bye.